Welcome back to the channel. Picture this. You're walking out to your car, and you're holding a single, incredibly flimsy plastic bag of basic groceries.
Right.
And I mean basic. You haven't bought anything luxurious. There's no steak in there, no fancy imported cheeses. It's just the absolute essentials like milk, eggs, maybe some bread.
Just survival food, basically.
Exactly. But then you look down at the receipt in your other hand, and you see this absurdly high number staring back at you. Something like, I don't know, $85.
Yeah, it's painful.
It is. Then you look back at the bag in your hand, and your brain just sort of short circuits. You are standing right there in the parking lot, genuinely trying to calculate how this tiny handful of items cost you so much.
It's a completely disorienting experience. I mean, you look at that bill and you know the number creeps up every single month, but somehow the physical bag in your hand, the actual volume of nutrition you are taking home to your family, it actually feels lighter.
Yes, it's a very visceral, just bizarre sensation. It feels almost like you are paying a massive premium just for the air inside the packaging. You know, you walk away feeling somewhat gaslit by the entire economy.
Well, that feeling of being gaslit is exactly why we need to dig into this today, because just to put your mind at ease right out of the gate, that sensation you are feeling is absolutely not just in your head.
Right.
What you are holding in that grocery bag and that painful discrepancy between its physical weight and its cost is actually the physical manifestation of a very mechanical, very deliberate economic reality.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today that is exactly our mission. We are going to validate that parking lot frustration you've been feeling.
Absolutely.
And we are going to uncover the true mechanical reality of why your money is buying less. Because it's not just bad luck, right?
Yeah.
We're looking at a massive, curated stack of research today. Decades of economic thought, historical data, and deep analysis from some of the most prominent economic minds and modern financial analysts of the last century.
Yeah, it's a huge stack of sources.
We are taking all of this source material to really look under the hood of inflation, shrinkflation, and the modern money supply.
Right, and our goal here is to basically bypass the usual noise. We aren't going to look at political spin. We aren't going to parrot the evening news headlines that, blame corporate greed one day and then blame global supply chains the next.
Right. That's always somebody else's fault on the news.
Exactly. We are focusing strictly on the mechanics, the actual gears turning in the global financial system that mathematically guarantee your grocery bag gets lighter.
So to kick this off, I feel like we really have to start at the source of the public's confusion. Where does that frustration actually begin? Because I'll be honest, when I see a significantly higher price on a carton of eggs or a gallon of milk, my immediate reaction is just, wow, inflation is really bad right now.
And that reaction is incredibly common. I mean, everyone says that, but it's fundamentally flawed. We have to clear up the single biggest misconception about this entire topic before we can even begin to understand the mechanics. The public, by and large, completely misunderstands what inflation actually is. When you look at that grocery receipt and see higher prices, you are not actually looking at inflation.
Wait, hold on. If prices going up isn't inflation, then what is? Because I feel like every time prices surge across the board, that's the exact word every journalist, politician, and banker uses to describe it. Are they just lying to us, or is there a missing piece of the puzzle here?
Well, they aren't necessarily lying, but they are using imprecise language that completely obscures the root cause. They are confusing the symptom with the disease.
The symptom.
Right. The higher price on that carton of eggs is merely the symptom. Think of it like a lingering cough. A cough is an indicator that you have a virus, but the cough itself is not the virus.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So to understand the actual disease, our research stack points us toward the monetarist perspective. This is a major school of economic thought which basically argues that the total amount of money circulating in an economy is the primary driver of what things cost.
So if the higher prices at the store are just the symptom, what is the actual root cause? What is the virus in this scenario?
The root cause of inflation is an increase in the money supply itself, period. The term inflation originally meant exactly what it sounds like, the literal inflating of the currency pool.
Just pumping more into it.
Exactly. When rigorous economists track this, they don't primarily monitor the price of milk, eggs, or gasoline. They track a very specific metric called M2.
Right, M2. I've seen that term thrown around in financial reports and, those dense economic articles. What exactly makes up the M2 money supply? How do they even measure that?
So M2 is the primary measure of the money supply that most directly impacts consumers like you and me. It encompasses all the physical cash floating around in the world, every paper bill in every wallet, every coin in every piggy bank.
Okay, that makes sense.
But in the modern era, physical cash is just a tiny, tiny fraction of the economy. So M2 also includes the digital equivalent of cash. All the money sitting in checking accounts and easily convertible savings accounts or money market funds.
So it's essentially the total ocean of spendable purchasing power out there, like ready to go.
Precisely that. It's liquid. And here is the mechanical reality of how this drives the symptom of higher prices. When that M2 money supply grows faster than the actual production of goods and services in the economy, the purchasing power of every individual dollar is mathematically watered down.
Watered down.
Yeah, it's a basic ratio. If the total amount of physical stuff to buy the cars, the houses, the groceries stays relatively the same, but the amount of money chasing that stuff suddenly doubles, the prices will adapt upward to soak up that newly created money.
You know, reading through the sources, this concept reminded me of making a massive pot of soup.
Oh, I like this.
Yeah, so imagine you have a set recipe. You got a huge pot on the stove. It's full of rich broth, chicken, carrots, celery, and it's perfectly portioned to feed a family of 10. It's a really high-quality, dense meal.
Sounds great.
Right. But right as dinner is about to be served, you get a call that 50 more people are showing up to eat.
A classic hosting nightmare, but a very apt economic scenario.
Right. But here's the problem. You don't have any more chicken. You don't have any more vegetables in the fridge. The physical goods are constrained. The only thing you have access to is the tap water at the sink.
Okay, I see where this is going.
So you just turn on the tap and keep adding water to the pot until it reaches the brim. Sure, the total volume of the soup goes up. You technically have enough liquid volume to put something into everyone's bowl. But the quality, the flavor, the actual nutritional density, basically the purchasing power of every single spoonful drops drastically.
Yeah, you haven't created more food, you've just diluted what was already there.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that tracking M2 completely flips the traditional consumer understanding of economics. Your soup analogy is brilliant because it highlights a crucial truth. The chicken and the vegetables, the real value, the tangible goods in the economy, they didn't change.
Right, they were exactly the same.
That bowl of soup didn't get inherently more difficult or expensive to make in terms of human labor or resources. What changed was the dilution of the broth.
Right.
When you are standing in the grocery store, the food hasn't suddenly become vastly more valuable. Your money has simply become less valuable because the M2 money supply has been relentlessly watered down.
So if inflation is fundamentally just the watering down of the money supply, the natural question you have to ask is, why? Why and how is the supply expanding so much? Who keeps turning on the tap and flooding the economic soup with water?
To truly understand that, we can't just look at today's policies. We actually have to travel back in time to a very specific, monumental historical catalyst, because the global financial system did not always operate this way.
Right.
To understand the modern tap, we have to look at a massive systemic pivot that occurred on August 15th, 1971.
1971. I mean, on one hand, that feels like a lifetime ago. But in the grand scheme of economic history, it's basically a blink of an eye. What exactly happened on that day in August?
Well, on that Sunday evening, the former U.S. president interrupted primetime television broadcasts to deliver an address to the nation. And during that speech, he officially, unilaterally, took the U.S. dollar off the gold standard.
Just like that.
Just like that. He effectively announced that the United States would no longer convert foreign-held dollars into physical gold.
Wait, let's back up for a second for some context. Before that broadcast, how did the global system actually function? Because the idea of taking a paper bill to a bank and getting a chunk of gold sounds like something out of a pirate movie, not modern finance.
I know, it sounds completely archaic now, but it was the foundation of global stability. Before that moment in 1971, the global financial system operated under an agreement established in 1944 known as Bretton Woods.
Okay, Bretton Woods.
Coming out of World War II, the world desperately needed a stable financial architecture. Under this system, the U.S. dollar was physically tied to gold at a fixed rate. And because the U.S. held the vast majority of the world's gold reserves at the time, other nations agreed to peg their own currencies to the dollar.
So the dollar was basically the proxy for gold.
Exactly. You could, under the system, demand a set amount of physical gold in exchange for your paper dollars. The paper in your wallet wasn't just paper, it was essentially a claim check.
Like at a coat check.
Right. A receipt for a physical, scarce asset sitting in a vault at Fort Knox or the Federal Reserve.
That creates a physical constraint. because mathematically you couldn't just print a billion new paper claim checks if you didn't have the actual gold bullion in the vault to back them up.
Right.
If you printed more checks than you had gold and everyone came to cash them in at once, the system would collapse.
Precisely. The gold standard acted as an ironclad leash on governments and central banks. It forced fiscal discipline. You couldn't just create money. But by the late 1960s, the U.S. was running massive deficits.
Of course.
They were funding a hugely expensive war abroad and rapidly expanding domestic social programs at home. So they were printing more claim checks than they had gold to cover.
Just quietly turning on the tap.
Yeah. And foreign nations realized this. They got nervous, and they started demanding their gold back. A major European nation even sent a battleship across the Atlantic to physically collect their gold reserves in exchange for dollars.
Wait, really? A battleship?
A literal battleship. The U.S. realized they were going to run out of gold very quickly. So on August 15th, 1971, they severed that tie. They suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold.
And severing that tie birthed the modern era of what our research refers to as fiat money. I know the word fiat is Latin. It translates to let it be done, or a formal decree.
That is the perfect literal translation because it describes exactly how the money derives its value today. Fiat money is a currency that holds value simply because a government decrees that it does.
Just because they said so.
Exactly. It is backed by the full faith and credit of the issuing government and its ability to levy taxes on its citizens rather than being backed by any physical constraint or scarce commodity like gold or silver.
Wait. If there is absolutely no physical constraint anymore, if there's no gold or silver acting as a natural anchor restricting the supply, does that mean modern institutions can just create money out of thin air? Like, is it truly limitless?
Yes. From a mechanical standpoint, there is no hard cap. And that realization in 1971 represented a profound psychological and systemic shift for human civilization.
I can imagine.
Removing a physical anchor from the world's global reserve currency fundamentally changed the rules of the economic game. It set the stage for an era of unconstrained, limitless money creation. Without gold acting as an impartial referee, the political temptation for governments to print money to solve short-term problems rather than making difficult budgetary choices became completely irresistible.
Okay, so they severed the tie, they took off the leash. But I want to understand the actual mechanics of how this new money enters the system. How are they creating it today? Because I know it's not just a bunch of guys in a basement with giant, clunky, physical printing presses churning out green paper bills. The global economy is way too massive for physical cash to move the needle like that.
You're absolutely right. The image of the printing press is deeply ingrained in our minds, but it's largely symbolic today. Physical cash makes up a tiny, tiny fraction of the money supply.
Right.
The vast, vast majority of modern money creation is entirely digital. It's just numbers moving on ledgers. And our sources point to three main interconnected engines that drive this digital money creation. These are the three powerful taps constantly adding water to your soup.
Let's break these down one by one, because this is where the mystery really lies for me. What is engine number one?
The first engine is the central banks. This is the most direct method of currency expansion. Central banks, which manage a nation's currency, have the unique authority to literally type numbers into a computer to create new digital reserves.
Literally just typing.
Just keystrokes. They don't have to mine gold. They don't have to collect taxes to get this money. They simply conjure it digitally.
They just type it in. That almost sounds too simple to be real. But okay, once they've typed $1 billion onto their screen, how does that money actually get out of their computer and into the real world to dilute the M2 supply?
Good question. They execute what are called open market operations. The central bank uses this freshly conjured digital money to purchase financial assets, most commonly government bonds or mortgage-backed securities from major commercial banks.
Okay.
By buying these assets, the central bank takes the bond onto its own balance sheet and credits the commercial bank's account with the brand new digital money. This process injects a massive wave of newly created liquidity directly into the financial system, instantly expanding the base money supply.
Okay, so that's engine number one. But thinking about this logically, if a central bank can just type numbers into a computer to buy assets like government bonds, couldn't the government just issue an endless amount of debt knowing the central bank will just create the money to buy it?
That logical leap you just made brings us perfectly to the second engine. Engine number two is deficit spending by national governments. This engine kicks into gear when a government wants to spend more money on wars, infrastructure, social safety nets, subsidies, whatever, than it actually collects in taxes from its citizens.
Which happens basically every single year. because significantly raising taxes is deeply unpopular and usually political suicide.
Precisely. Politicians want to deliver benefits without inflicting the pain of taxation. So instead of raising taxes to balance the budget, they issue debt. The Treasury Department creates government bonds, which are essentially formalized IOUs that promise to pay back the money with interest over time.
But wait, if the government just sells those bonds to regular private citizens or pension funds who use their existing already saved money to buy them, the total money supply wouldn't actually change, right? The money is just changing hands from a citizen to the government.
You've hit on a crucial distinction. If only private savings were used to buy government debt, it would not be inflationary at all. The soup wouldn't get more water. But the scale of modern deficit spending is far too massive for private savings to absorb.
I see.
So this is where Engine 1 and Engine 2 combine forces. The central banks step in as the buyer of last resort. They buy up massive portions of this government debt using the newly created digital money we just talked about.
Wow. So the government writes an IOU, and the central bank prints the new money to fund it. The government then takes that brand new, digitally conjured money and spends it out into the real economy, paying defense contractors, funding grants, paying government employees.
Yes. The new money flows directly into checking accounts and businesses, massively expanding the M2 supply. The government gets brand new purchasing power to spend today, and the central bank just holds the IOU.
If a normal citizen did that, if I wrote a massive check to myself from a fake bank account I created just to pay off my credit card, I'd go to federal prison for fraud.
Oh, absolutely you would.
But at the sovereign level, this is legally built into the global system. That is wild. Okay, so we have central banks typing money and governments borrowing that typed money to spend. What is the third engine?
The third engine is perhaps the most hidden from the average consumer, yet it is responsible for the vast majority of money creation in our daily lives. It's private commercial banking, specifically operating through a mechanism called fractional reserve banking.
Fractional reserve banking. I've heard this term in passing. This is how the everyday banks that you and I use on the corner operate, right?
Correct. Let's walk through a literal transaction to see how this mechanically expands the money supply. When you deposit your paycheck, say, $10,000 into your checking account, you assume the bank takes that money and puts it in a little digital lockbox with your name on it.
Right, that's my money. I expect it to be there.
But that's not how it works at all. By law, banks are only required to keep a very small fraction of your deposited money on hand in reserve. Historically, this was around 10%, but in recent years, for many institutions, reserve requirements were actually reduced to zero.
Wait, zero? So they don't have to hold any of it?
Zero. But for the sake of easy math, let's pretend they have a 10% reserve requirement. You deposit $10,000. The bank keeps $1,000 in the vault to handle daily withdrawals. They take the other $9,000 of your money and lend it out to someone else who wants to buy a used car or start a small business.
Okay, let's pause here because this is where the math gets trippy for me. If I open my banking app on my phone right now, my balance still clearly says I have $10,000. I can go swipe my debit card right now based on that number.
Right.
But the guy who got the car loan just received $9,000 deposited into his account to go buy that car. We just went from $10,000 of total purchasing power to $19,000 of purchasing power instantly. The money just magically multiplied.
It did, and the cycle doesn't stop there.
You're kidding.
No, the guy takes that $9,000, goes to a car dealership, and buys a car. The dealership takes that $9,000 and deposits it into their bank account at a completely different bank.
Oh, boy.
That second bank takes the $9,000 deposit, keeps 10%, which is $900 in reserve, and lends out the remaining $8,100 to someone buying a home renovation.
So a single initial deposit can be mathematically multiplied over and over and over again into massive amounts of circulating credit.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear how unimaginably powerful these engines are. In our modern economy, this credit, these multiplied numbers on a screen, acts exactly the same as base money. When you swipe a credit card, the merchant doesn't care if it's base money or fractional reserve credit. They just accept the payment.
Right. Money is money to them.
So when you have central banks conjuring money to buy assets, governments deficit spending to inject it into the real economy, and private banks multiplying every deposited dollar through fractional reserves, these three engines are working in tandem to relentlessly expand the M2 supply. They are literally a perpetual motion machine of currency dilution.
And every single time that machine cycles, it waters down the broth. It dilutes the purchasing power of the money sitting in your wallet. Which brings us right back to the grocery store parking lot.
Exactly.
Because bridging this high-level macroeconomic theory back to the micro level is where it really hits home. We feel the effects of those three engines directly attacking our grocery bags through a phenomenon known as shrinkflation.
Shrinkflation is the inevitable corporate response to this systemic watering down of the currency. The media often portrays it purely as corporate greed, but the mechanics reveal a different story. It is actually a survival tactic.
Right, because these companies, whether they make cereal, soap, or snack food, are dealing with the exact same reality we are. Their production costs are rising. The diesel fuel for their delivery trucks costs more. The raw wheat for their cereal costs more. The wages for their factory workers have to go up. Why? Because the money they used to pay for all of those things is losing its value.
Exactly. The company is facing a mathematical dilemma. They know that if they raise the price of a box of cereal from $4 to $6 to cover their new inflated costs, consumers will experience sticker shock, become outraged, and switch to a generic brand.
People hate price hikes.
Consumers are highly sensitive to price increases, so the corporation employs a psychological workaround. They keep the price at exactly $4, but they subtly reduce the volume of the product in the packaging.
They put 12 ounces of cereal in a box that used to hold 14 ounces. They redesign the logo, maybe make the cardboard box a little narrower, but the exact same height so it looks identical on the shelf. And they just cross their fingers and pray you don't notice that you were literally taking home fewer calories for the exact same price.
And it goes beyond just smaller packaging, too. The sources point out something called skimpflation, where they quietly change the ingredients to cheaper alternatives, swapping real cane sugar for high-fructose corn syrup, or using cheaper industrial seed oils instead of butter.
Wow, so the quality drops too.
It's an incredibly insidious effect of the dilution. You think you're paying the same amount, but mechanically, your price per ounce and your price per unit of quality has skyrocketed. But the research stack we're analyzing points out something even more profound than a smaller box of cereal. When you zoom out, these economists describe inflation not just as a phenomenon of rising prices, but as a brilliantly disguised invisible tax.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and honestly, profoundly unfair to the average citizen. Because to understand how inflation functions as a tax, you have to look at who actually benefits from it. We've established that the everyday consumer is getting crushed, but someone must be winning this game.
To find the winner, you always look at the balance sheets. The biggest beneficiaries of inflation are always the biggest debtors. And who is universally the largest debtor in any given economy?
The national government.
A national government.
Yeah.
They owe trillions upon trillions of dollars in sovereign debt.
Okay, walk me through the math on this. How does diluting the currency help someone who owes a massive amount of debt?
It's a mechanism of wealth transfer. When a currency loses its purchasing power, the real tangible burden of fixed debt actually shrinks.
Okay.
Let's say a government borrowed $1 billion a decade ago. Back then, the dollar was strong. $1 billion could buy a massive amount of labor, concrete, and steel. The government got to spend that highly valuable money. But today, because the three engines have been running and inflating the money supply, the dollars they use to pay back that old debt are worth significantly less. The face value of the debt is exactly the same. It still says $1 billion on the ledger, but the actual burden, the amount of real-world value they have to sacrifice to pay it off, has been vaporized by inflation.
So they borrow strong money, and they pay it back with weak money. That is a phenomenal, unbelievably good deal for the debtor, but it's a terrible, punishing deal for the saver.
Absolutely terrible.
If I worked hard 10 years ago and saved $1,000 in a traditional bank account, the government is essentially stealing the purchasing power from my savings to melt away the burden of their debt. And the craziest part is, nobody ever voted on a ballot for this invisible tax. You never went to a voting booth in November and checked a box that said, yes, please dilute the purchasing power of my life savings by 7% this year to help pay down the national debt. It happens automatically, entirely in the background.
It is arguably the most effective tax ever devised, precisely because it bypasses the legislative process and is largely invisible to the economically untrained eye. But the systemic consequences of this invisible tax are devastating. It fundamentally reshapes the relationship between a government and its people.
How so?
This dynamic completely breaks down the fabric of trust in a society. It creates a perverse system where responsible, traditional behavior, saving your money, being frugal, living within your means, is actively punished, Meanwhile, reckless borrowing and leveraging up on debt is financially rewarded.
It pits everyone against each other. It pits the consumer against the producer, who is just trying to survive rising supply costs by shrinking their packaging, while the consumer accuses them of corporate greed. And ultimately, it pits citizens against the system itself because they can feel deep in their bones that they are falling behind, even if they don't have a degree in macroeconomics to understand the mechanics of M2 expansion.
So, if we accept this reality, if the system is mathematically designed to dilute value, if the three engines of fiat creation are always running and the invisible tax is always taking a cut of your wealth, the critical pivot in our discussion must be about survival.
Yeah.
How does a normal person earning a normal wage navigate this? Because based on everything we've covered, it sounds like you're trapped on a rapidly sinking ship.
Moving from the problem to the actionable reality is essential. And looking at the conclusions from our research stack, the very first step to surviving this system is brutal acceptance. You have to accept that the rules of the financial game fundamentally changed in 1971, and the old rulebook is dead.
The old American dream is a relic of a completely different monetary era. The idea that you can just put your head down, work hard at a steady job, save your extra cash in a traditional fiat savings account, and eventually retire comfortably, that is mathematically impossible in a highly inflationary fiat system.
Right, because the water keeps getting added to the soup.
Exactly. If you try to save your way to wealth in a traditional checking account, the inflation rate will melt your purchasing power far faster than you can accumulate it through wage increases. The new, unavoidable reality, as these economists emphasize, is that today you are forced to earn your money twice.
Earn your money twice. That is a heavy, almost depressing concept. Break that down for me.
Well, you earn your money the first time through your physical labor, your time, and your expertise. You're trading your finite life energy for a salary. But because the fiat currency you receive is constantly melting, your job isn't done.
The first time isn't enough.
No. You have to earn it a second time by figuring out how to invest it, allocate it, and manage it just to tread water against the dilution. You are forced to become an amateur portfolio manager and take on financial risks simply to maintain the value of the time you already spent working.
So what does this all mean practically? It means the only solution is to proactively move your wealth out of melting fiat currencies and into scarce assets. The sources we are studying refer to these scarce assets as financial lifeboats.
I actually want to reframe the lifeboat analogy because a lifeboat implies you're just floating aimlessly, hoping for rescue. A better way to conceptualize these assets, based on the mechanics we've discussed, is to think of them as vaults.
Vaults, okay.
If the fiat system is a bank where the manager can endlessly print new keys to access and dilute everyone's wealth, you need to move your energy into a vault where the supply of keys is strictly constrained. And the defining characteristic of these vaults is absolute scarcity. You need an asset that cannot be endlessly expanded by the three engines of central banks, deficit spending, or fractional reserve banking.
Let's talk about the specific vaults or lifeboats highlighted in the research. The first one is the oldest and most classic, gold.
Gold is the ultimate historical scarce asset. For over 5,000 years of human civilization, it has served as a reliable store of value. Its value doesn't come from a government decree. It comes from its physical properties and its extreme difficulty to extract from the earth.
Right, you can't just type gold into existence on a central bank computer. The supply of gold only grows by about 1 or 2% a year, and that requires massive amounts of capital, diesel fuel, heavy machinery, and human labor to physically mine it out of the ground.
Exactly. It has what economists call a high stock-to-flow ratio. The existing stockpile of gold is massive compared to the tiny trickle of new gold mined each year. Crucially, in the context of our discussion, gold is completely outside the control of the fiat engines.
Because it's a physical element.
Right. No politician facing an election can decree that there is suddenly twice as much gold in the world to pay off a national deficit. It provides a physical constraint.
Okay, the second vault mentioned in the sources is a bit more nuanced.
Right.
The Swiss franc. Now, this is still a fiat currency, right? It's still paper money printed by a government. So why is it considered a lifeboat compared to the dollar, the euro, or the pound?
While it is indeed a fiat currency, all fiat is not created equal. The Swiss franc has historically acted as a safe haven vault during times of global inflation. This is heavily tied to Switzerland's unique geopolitical and economic history.
How so?
They have a long-standing tradition of strong banking privacy, fierce geopolitical neutrality, and a generally much more conservative, disciplined approach to money creation compared to other major central bank engines.
It's essentially the cleanest shirt in a very dirty laundry basket of global fiat currencies.
Yeah,
You're betting on the discipline of the Swiss government compared to the recklessness of others.
exactly.
But the third vault is where things get really fascinating and highly modern, Bitcoin. It gets brought up incessantly in these macroeconomic conversations today. Why does Bitcoin specifically act as a vault against everything we've talked about?
It all comes down to its underlying architecture, which was explicitly designed to counter the exact flaws of the fiat system we've outlined today. If gold is a vault constrained by physics and geology, Bitcoin is a vault constrained by pure mathematics and cryptography.
Pure math?
Yes, Bitcoin was designed with strictly enforced, unalterable scarcity. The underlying code of the decentralized network dictates that there will only ever be a hard cap of 21 million coins. Ever.
So it has a digital constraint built right into its DNA. But how do we know they won't just change the code? I mean, humans wrote the code. Can't humans change it to print more, just like they did in 1971 when they changed the rules of the gold standard?
That is the genius of the decentralized consensus mechanism. Unlike the gold standard, where a single president could unilaterally suspend the rules on a Sunday night, Bitcoin has no central authority, no CEO, and no central bank.
No one is in charge.
Exactly. To change the 21 million hard cap, you would have to convince tens of thousands of independent node operators around the globe to voluntarily dilute their own wealth. It's game theoretically impossible. Furthermore, the rate at which new Bitcoin is issued is governed by a mathematical difficulty adjustment.
Wait, so it automatically adjusts?
Yes. If more computers try to mine it, the math simply becomes harder, ensuring the supply schedule never accelerates.
So no central bank can decide to alter the code to print more Bitcoin to cover a sudden government deficit. No government can deficit spend it into existence, and no fractional reserve bank can artificially multiply it, because the blockchain requires public verification of every single unit. It completely short-circuits and bypasses all three engines of modern fiat money creation.
Precisely. Because its supply is perfectly inelastic, fixed, and transparent to anyone in the world, it functions as an engineered mathematical hedge against fiat dilution. It represents a form of money that operates entirely outside the realm of political influence and human temptation.
So synthesizing everything we've explored in this deep dive, the ultimate takeaway is that staying in cash, keeping your wealth in a traditional fiat checking account, isn't playing it safe anymore. In a system mathematically designed to expand, holding static cash is a guaranteed slow-motion loss.
It's a leaky bucket.
Yeah, the necessity of proactively moving your wealth into vaults that have a physical or mathematical limit isn't just a clever Wall Street investment strategy. It is a fundamental survival mechanism for the working class.
That is the perfect way to frame it. If we look back at the historical pivot of 1971, the world lost its anchor. The global financial system became entirely unmoored from physical reality, relying instead on the promises of politicians. What these financial vaults, whether you prefer the ancient physical constraint of gold or the modern mathematical constraint of Bitcoin, provide, is a return to an anchor.
A physical or mathematical tether.
Right. They offer a way for individuals to voluntarily opt back into a system of scarcity, consequence, and constraint, thereby protecting the stored value of their time and labor from the invisible tax of the fiat engines.
Wow. Okay, to briefly recap the massive journey we've been on today. We started in the grocery store parking lot with the visceral sticker shock of higher prices and lighter bags.
Yeah.
But we learned that the root cause is actually the relentless, unseen expansion of the M2 money supply, the watering down of our economic soup. We trace that disease back to the historical pivot in 1971, when the world abandoned the gold standard constraint and embraced limitless fiat money. We looked under the hood at how central banks, deficit spending, and fractional reserve banking act as a perpetual motion machine to constantly dilute that money.
The three engines.
Right. We saw how this results in corporate shrinkflation and acts as a massive, invisible wealth transfer from savers to debtors. And finally, we explored why finding financial vaults assets with true, unalterable scarcity is the only mathematical way to survive the system.
It is an immensely complex machine, but once you take the time to see the gears turning, you can never unsee them. And this raises an important question, one that extends far beyond just macroeconomics and touches the very core of human civilization. The source material noted earlier that inflation pits consumers against producers and citizens against the system. It fundamentally breaks down the fabric of trust.
Because you feel like the game is rigged against you no matter how hard you work.
Exactly. So think about this final concept. Money is not just a tool for exchange. It is the foundational layer of trust in a society. It is the agreed-upon ledger we use to value each other's time, labor, and lifetime contributions. If that foundational layer, that base level of trust, is being mathematically engineered to constantly, deliberately lose its value to benefit the institutions that control it, what does that mean for the long-term survival of trust in our other societal institutions?
That's a scary thought.
Can a society realistically maintain high trust in its government, its judicial system, its media, or its cultural institutions when its very base layer of value, the way citizens feed their families, is constantly evaporating right in front of their eyes?
That is a deeply unsettling yet incredibly vital question. If the concrete foundation of a house is actively melting away, how long can the walls and the roof continue to stand? Definitely something profound for you to mull over the next time you're carrying those noticeably lighter groceries out to your car. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive today, and we'll see you on the next one.